Jürgen, and looking forward to hearing your views on this very interesting, important topic on how does product design impact supply chain. And that's my first question is, so how does product design impact the supply chain?
Okay, first of all, good morning, Dusty, to you. Thanks for this interview, for the opportunity to speak about the subject of how product design influences supply chains. And just coming to your first question, I mean, it's pretty obvious that when you think about the product life cycle, which starts with typically with concepting, somebody has an idea about a product, or more people have an idea about a product, then they develop this concept of the product together. And once the concept is ready, then they go into the real design work, which is the CAD drawings and the M-KEB and the E-KEB, and depending what the product is, maybe plastics design, housings, surface finishings, and all these kind of things. And during that design process, designers, design engineers take decisions based on what they believe would be good for the product. But they very often do not think about, okay, this product needs to be manufactured somehow. This product needs to have components need to be sourced. Where do we get these components from? Are there suppliers for these components? And all these kind of questions. And whatever they decide during their design process has a direct impact on the efficiency of the supply chain. I'll give you an example. Design engineers typically, and I can say that because I'm an engineer as well by education, they want the greatest and best components in their product. They want to have the highest functionality, the most features in their product, because they are just design engineers. That's a natural thing. And therefore, they may tend to select components which are overly expensive, for example, or which are over-engineered, meaning containing features and functions that are nice to have in the product, but they're not necessarily required for the basic function of the product. So there is a buzzword calling just enough technology. If you take that into consideration while you design your product, just enough technology, just build in what you need for your product, just specify your tolerances as narrow or as wide as you can, and only as narrow as it's required for the functionality. If you do that, then you may end up with the right components, with the right functionality, and therefore, at the end of the day, with the right product cost. If you don't do that, if you create the fanciest and highest sophisticated functions in your product, you may end up with a product that's completely great, but it's totally expensive. Nobody wants to buy it because it's too expensive. It has too many functions for the user, and that's a direct impact on the supply chain. Furthermore, you may select components from suppliers that are maybe niche suppliers, that are exotic suppliers, that are suppliers locating in very remote places in the world. So the cost of components, the shipping, transportation, logistics to the place of manufacturing might become really expensive, which also has a direct negative impact on the cost of your product and therefore on the supply chain. The bottom line of the thinking here is this, that in every product lifecycle, so if you think about a product lifecycle, from concepting to design to volume manufacturing, to end of life and to support phases, and also to the reverse supply chain, meaning return, recycle, refurbish, and so forth, repair also. That's the entire product life cycle. And if you think on the entire product life cycle, then it's clear that in the supply chain, money is spent or money is saved in terms of your product cost. And that's what design people need to take into consideration, all these dynamics of today's supply chains. Typically, design engineers, they know a lot about mechanical designs, electrical designs, but they don't know much about supply chain dynamics. And here is when the purchasing people come into the game. But this typically the classical purchasing people into the game doesn't make the situation better. It makes the situation maybe even worse, because what sourcing people typically do, they are paid against how much they save on components or whatever they purchase on the market for the company. And so their driver is to buy the cheapest components this behavior has also a very negative impact on the entire supply chain or the entire supply ecosystem, because when you only buy what sourcing organizations typically do, they separate a product into commodities. So, for example, a display would be a commodity, or the main board would be a commodity, the housing would be a commodity, plastic parts would be a commodity, battery would be a commodity, and so forth. Interconnects would be commodities, cables, and so forth. So they divide a product into commodities, and then they source on a very low level, meaning on a very detailed level. They source components at the cheapest price because that's what they are paid for, to save money for the company, which means sourcing the cheapest components. Then you may end up with a so-called best bill of material, best BOM, which means the cheapest possible summary of cost for all individual components added up for the product. But that does not necessarily represent the best supply chain, because you may end up with a supply chain with a ton of different players from all over the world. You have a huge effort for logistics to bring all these components together to the place of manufacturing for your EMS partner or contract manufacturing partner. You have to manage all these different suppliers. And therefore, this does not create the best supply chain either. And at the end of the day, such a supply chain may be more costly than a supply chain that was purposely designed. So what needs to be done? It's very important that design engineers understand supply chain dynamics, purchasing people understand supply chain dynamics and the backside of this best BOM sourcing, and they need to come together. And maybe what they need to do is they need to find the so-called diamond suppliers. Those are suppliers who not only provide components, but who can also provide engineering services or components integration services, like take their own component and a component from another supplier and integrate it into their component, so that you as the end customer, you purchase a higher integrated, let me say, a module rather than a component, which takes a number of players out of your supply chain and moves it in the supply chain of your suppliers, which is easier for you to manage and to handle. That cuts logistics cost, that cuts cost of managing suppliers, and that speeds up supply chains. And it's very important that sourcing people, design engineers, they understand these dynamics, they come together, they select the so-called diamond suppliers, even in very early concepting phases, bring the diamond suppliers to the table as well, and ask them for their help in the development of your or the design of your product. So co-creation is the magic word here. Co-creation with your key suppliers, with your diamond suppliers. If you're able to do this, and if you're open enough to bring external design partners like the design engineers of your suppliers to the table to create your product, then you will end up with an extremely lean supply chain because it contains only a few players, and that makes a supply chain agile. So what you get is a lean and an agile supply chain at the same time. This is nowadays called under a buzzword called leagility. It's this combination out of lean and agile, and this is exactly what you need to strive for in order to produce your product at the lowest possible cost in total. Not only cost of components or cost of the product, but also cost of the supply chain. That's the idea behind. So that was a lengthy answer to your question. Does that make sense?
And can you provide a brief background of yourself?
Yeah, my background is I'm like almost 30 years in high-tech electronics business. I have an engineering background. After university, I started working in manufacturing for Hewlett-Packard in Germany. And I did that for a couple of years, took over responsibility for the entire surface mount assembly department. Then after a couple of years, I moved into test and measurement sales at HP. And then until 1999, I ran a group of salespeople. I was a sales manager by then with a group of salespeople dealing with the telecommunication industries, providing the telecommunication industries with test and measurement equipment. Then I moved to the EMS industry, served as a director of business development for global accounts like Siemens, for a number of different EMS suppliers such as Sanmina, SCI, then a couple of years later Flextronics. In between, I was responsible for Sanmina's European PCB business, printed circuit business. Then I was a couple of years working for M-Flex, which is a US-based supplier of flexible printed circuit assemblies, dealing with the smartphone industries. And during that time, I got into the situation that I had to dive deep into the supply chain thing, because one of my customers was Sony Ericsson. Sony Ericsson did exactly what I just described. They only sourced the cheapest components. And we, as an American company, we could not compete with the Taiwanese and the Chinese suppliers of flexible printed circuit assemblies. So I had to find out different ways to be successful with my customer. And what we did then by that time, we bought the first Sony Ericsson smartphone, which was the Xperia 1. We did a reverse engineering, disassembled the whole thing. We analyzed their supply chain, and we came up with a conclusion and a proposal to Sony Ericsson how to streamline their supply chain. I did that in cooperation with Dr. Hendrik Brome. He is the headmaster of Reutlingen University here in Germany, and here is, at least in Europe, very famous for being a supply chain specialist, because he once concepted and designed a factory for HP, which was called the Solution Factory, and this factory won like 3 industry awards in a row for the best logistics concepts. And from him, I learned my supply chain background, and together with him, we created that proposal for Sony Ericsson, how to streamline their supply chain by modularization, by doing different things in product design. And that, at the end of the day, brought me into this supply chain thing. Today, I'm working as a senior advisor in subjects like supply chain design with a Swedish consulting company called M-KEB Consulting, or M-KEB Development. And what we do is providing consultancy and advice to our customers in the electronics space in terms of one is operational excellence and the other one is supply chain design. That's in brief my background.
And thanks for sharing today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Dustin.